Welcome to the Vertical Farming Briefing. Today we are running a proper three-way discussion. I have Maya with me, who has been following this space from the investment and commercial side for years, and we also have Ren, who tends to ask the questions nobody wants to ask. I will be keeping the facts straight. The topic today is a new study claiming that urban farming could cover up to 28% of Europe's vegetable demand. It was picked up by the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. It got a lot of attention, and I think we have three genuinely different reactions to it.
I'll say upfront that when I read this, I thought, finally. A peer-reviewed study, published in Sustainable Cities and Society, 840 cities across 30 European countries, actual spatial analysis. This is not a startup pitch deck. This is research. And 28% is a number that should make city planners and investors sit up.
And I'll say upfront that I have read studies like this before. The number is real. The farms are not. I'm not here to dismiss the research. I actually think the methodology is interesting. What I am here to do is ask what happens between the headline and the harvest.
Let's start with what the study actually says, because I want to make sure we are arguing about the same thing. The researchers looked at available urban land across 840 European cities. They estimated that between 551 and 586 square kilometers of urban space could theoretically support vegetable cultivation. That yields somewhere between 8 and 8 million tons per year. That's where the 28% comes from. 28% of the vegetable demand of 190 million European residents.
And to be clear about the significance of that number, Europe currently imports a substantial portion of its vegetables. Spain and the Netherlands are doing enormous work supplying Northern and Central Europe. Any meaningful increase in local production reduces dependency on long supply chains, reduces transport emissions, and improves food resilience. Those are not abstract benefits. They matter.
I don't disagree that they matter. What I disagree with is that a spatial analysis of available urban land tells you anything reliable about actual production capacity. These two things are not the same. The study is measuring surfaces. Farming is not a surface problem.
So what's the specific gap you see between what the study measured and what you would need to call it a viable supply number?
Start with the rooftops themselves. A flat roof that appears usable on satellite imagery is not automatically usable. The first question is structural load capacity. Soil is heavy. Water is heavy. Equipment is heavy. Most commercial rooftops were designed to hold HVAC systems and maybe some solar panels, not growing operations with substrate, irrigation infrastructure, and the foot traffic of regular maintenance crews.
That's a real constraint. But it's also an engineering problem, and engineering problems have solutions. Lightweight growing systems already exist. Hydroponic setups can be designed for much lower load profiles than soil-based systems. The industry has specifically developed technology to address this.
It has, at a cost, and that cost has to go somewhere. Who is paying for the structural assessment? Who is paying for the retrofit? Who is paying for the building permit, the drainage redesign, the insurance reclassification? Because none of that appears in a spatial analysis.
This connects to something the article on vertical farming blog flags directly the distinction between low-tech and high-tech urban agriculture. The study's 28% figure is not primarily about vertical farms with LED lighting and climate control. It is about rooftop and open space cultivation using more basic methods. Sun, seasonal cycles, simpler infrastructure.
Which actually makes the number more achievable, not less. You do not need a plenty-scale facility to grow food on a rooftop. Community gardens, small commercial rooftop operations, peri-urban market gardens, these are proven models that exist right now across European cities. Rotterdam, Paris, Berlin, Copenhagen. They are not theoretical.
They exist at a scale that is nowhere near 28% of European vegetable demand. A community garden in Berlin is a social amenity. I have nothing against it. But let's not pretend that scaling community gardens across 840 cities gets you to 19 million tons of annual production.
Nobody said that's the only path. The study is about potential across a spectrum of models. And my point is that you do not need every rooftop to be a high-tech vertical farm. A mix of low-tech, mid-tech, and targeted high-tech deployment across European cities, coordinated through smart urban planning, could get you to a meaningful fraction of that potential.
coordinated through smart urban planning. That phrase is doing a lot of work in your argument.
Fair it is. European urban planning is fragmented, slow, and expensive. I know that.
Let's spend a minute on the energy question specifically, because I think this is where the Infarm story is still casting a long shadow over this entire conversation.
It should be. Infarm was the most visible European urban farming company. The concept was clear: modular growing units, supermarkets, short supply chains, fresh produce close to the consumer. It attracted serious investment, and it collapsed under its operating costs, with energy costs being a central factor. In winter, running LED lights to grow lettuce in a warehouse in Germany. The carbon math and the economic math both became very difficult to justify.
I don't think you can use Infarm as the definitive argument against all indoor agriculture. Infarm had specific structural problems beyond just energy costs. Their expansion was too fast. Their model was too dependent on placing units inside retailers rather than building centralized farm capacity, and they were growing commodity crops with thin margins. That is a specific set of decisions that led to a specific failure. It doesn't mean that urban farming in Europe cannot work.
It means that urban farming in Europe under high energy cost conditions, growing commodity crops without genuine pricing power, cannot work, which is actually most of the market.
That's worth unpacking. Most of the studies identified potential is for vegetable crops, the kinds of things European households buy in volume. Tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, peppers, leafy greens. These are not premium products. They are largely commodity vegetables.
In outdoor production they are. In urban production, positioned correctly, they can carry a local premium. There are consumers who will pay more for a tomato grown on a rooftop 2 kilometers away than one shipped from Almeria. That market is real.
That market is real, and it is small. The people who will pay a premium for a local rooftop tomato are a specific demographic in specific cities. They are not 190 million European vegetable consumers. The moment you try to scale urban production to meaningfully address European vegetable demand, you are selling to people who are not going to pay a premium for provenance. And at that point, you are competing with Spanish and Dutch outdoor production at a structural cost disadvantage.
You keep framing this as a binary, either premium and small or commodity and unviable. But there is a middle ground. Specialty crops, herbs, salad leaves, microgreens, these can be grown at scale with better economics than tomatoes or cucumbers. The energy cost per kilogram for high-value, fast-growing crops is much more manageable than for heavy fruiting vegetables.
This is actually a point the article makes explicitly. The strongest candidates for urban agriculture are crops that grow quickly, tolerate controlled conditions, carry a freshness premium, and require no deep soil. Leafy greens, herbs, specialty vegetables, that cluster has genuinely better economics.
Agreed. And that cluster represents what percentage of Europe's total vegetable demand by volume?
A smaller percentage than the total, yes.
So what the study's 28% potential actually looks like in practice, if you filter for what is economically viable, is probably more like 5 to 8%, which is still meaningful. But it is not 28%.
I'd push back on that narrowing, because the point is that you do not have to solve the entire spectrum to make this worth pursuing. If European cities could reliably produce 8 to 10% of their own vegetable demand, locally, with lower transport costs and higher resilience to supply chain disruption, that is a real policy and investment opportunity. The fact that it is not 28% does not make it negligible.
Let's bring in a dimension that I think gets under-discussed in these conversations, which is the supply side, not the farm operators, but the companies supplying the infrastructure for urban agriculture.
This is actually where I think the more interesting business opportunity is, and I will say this as someone who has been skeptical throughout. If more cities, real estate developers, retailers, and food companies begin exploring urban agriculture, even in low-tech forms, demand grows for enabling infrastructure. Lightweight growing systems designed for rooftop load limits. Irrigation and drainage solutions built for buildings rather than fields. Monitoring tools sized for small and mid-scale operations. Automation designed for operators without agricultural backgrounds.
That's been my view for a while. The picks and shovels argument applies to urban agriculture the same way it applies to mining or tech infrastructure. You don't have to bet on which farms succeed. You can supply the inputs that every urban farm needs regardless of who wins at the operation level.
European technology companies are well positioned here. The Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, there is genuine engineering and horticultural expertise in this region. The risk profile of a technology or equipment supplier is fundamentally different from the risk profile of a farm operator. You are not carrying the energy bill, the lease, the regulatory exposure. You are selling into a growing market for enabling tools.
Before we close, I want to address the geographic variation question, because I think the 28% figure obscures some very important differences across European markets.
This is a real issue. The Netherlands and parts of Scandinavia have developed urban and peri-urban agriculture infrastructure that other European markets simply do not have yet. The regulatory environment, the planning frameworks, the investor familiarity, these things are not uniform across 30 countries.
Germany is an interesting case. On paper, it has significant urban density, sophisticated building stock, and strong consumer interest in sustainable food. In practice, it has one of the most expensive electricity markets in Europe, strict planning regulations, high labor costs, and a permitting environment that can delay projects by years. The country that gave you Infarm also gave you the conditions that helped sink Infarm.
But Germany also gave you significant investment in renewable energy. As the energy transition continues, electricity costs in Germany are not static. A model that does not work under 2023 German electricity prices may work under 2028 prices with a different grid mix. You have to think about where this is going, not just where it is.
I agree that the energy picture in Germany is changing. I would just note that we have been saying that for a while, and the pace of change in grid economics does not always match the pace at which people underwrite business models based on future assumptions.
So where does that leave us? Let me try to summarize what I think we have actually established. The study is legitimate research. The 28% figure reflects a real spatial analysis of urban land potential. The gap between that potential and actual production is large and filled with real obstacles: structural load, regulatory complexity, energy costs, geographic mismatch between supply and demand, and the economics of commodity versus specialty crops.
And my position is that none of those obstacles are permanent. They are engineering, regulatory, and economic problems. The ones that have been tried before in farm-style models under the wrong conditions failed because of specific choices, not because the fundamental idea of growing food in cities is unworkable. The 28% figure is a ceiling, not a guarantee. But it is a real ceiling, and the space between zero and that ceiling is worth pursuing with the right models, the right crops, and the right market positioning.
My position is that the sector needs to be honest about which part of that space is actually reachable under real-world conditions, and stop using theoretical potential figures to justify business models that do not survive contact with a German electricity bill and a building permit office. The opportunity in urban agriculture is real. It is just considerably smaller and more specific than the headline numbers suggest, and the companies that succeed will be the ones that solve operational and regulatory problems, not the ones that sell a vision of cities feeding themselves.
I think that's actually a reasonable synthesis. The potential is real. The execution gap is also real. And the most defensible positions in this market, whether for operators, investors, or technology suppliers, are the ones that are built around solving the execution problem, not around assuming it away.
One last thing I want to add. The fact that mainstream financial press, like the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, is running this story says something about where the policy conversation is heading. Urban food resilience is going to be a European policy theme for the next decade. That creates regulatory and subsidy environments that shift the economics over time. Being early in markets where policy tailwinds are building is not a bad place to be.
I don't disagree. I just want to make sure that when capital goes in based on policy tailwind assumptions, the underlying unit economics have also been stress-tested. Policy can help. It cannot replace a viable business model.
That was today's episode. The article we covered is on verticafarming.blog. Maya Wren, thanks for the argument.
Always.
Worth having.
We're back next week.